The first thing you need to ask yourself is, was the original problem addressed? There was a frustration that brought you to the point of making a decision. Was that actually what had happened? Was the decision you made, did that solve the problem that was originally came up? Review the pros and cons to the urgency of the situation or the time frame you used. Did the decision come about at an appropriate time? The third thing is, when you reiterated your values, weigh your decision against your values. Now that the decision has been made, is it aligned with what is truly important? Does it align with your priorities? Fourth thing is, talk to the people who've been involved. Are they happy with what turned out? Was it the expected end that happened? The fifth thing, has the actions of you or your organization been consistent with the decision that you've made? It's not very often that an individual or an organization will take the time to go all the way down through evaluating a decision that has been made. But taking this step will help you learn to become a more effective decision maker, give you more confidence in the future, especially when difficult decisions come up. Next, we're going to be talking about more specifically about you personally as a decision maker, taking a look inside. What motivates me? What are my expectations? What are people expecting of me? What are the pros and cons to my personality and the role it plays in decision making?
Computer updated.
Most of the time in this series, talking about the external factors of decision making. But let's talk about you. You are the decision maker. Over the course of the next, begin to look at the internal factors of the decision maker.
Computer updated.
So, here you are. You're faced with a dilemma, and a decision is necessary. How do you feel about that? Do you experience anxiety? Are you excited about the possibility? My guess is that it really depends on the arena of life that decision is in. Whether or not you are a decisive person or indecisive person. We talked in the past how a decision is really an action that you take based on the choices that are available to you. So, when we talk about making a decision, we're talking about committing to that action. So, it really comes down to, are you willing to commit or not to the decision? And that really comes down to an issue of confidence. Guess what I'd use as the opposite of confidence would be the word insecure. An indecisive person, or if you're indecisive, I guess we're talking about you, so let's make this personal. If you're indecisive in a certain area, it's probably because you're insecure. Now, I want to interject, and I'll come back to this later. We're not necessarily talking about a quick decision. We're not talking about the timing of the decision at this stage of the game. It's just whether or not do you feel confident or do you feel insecure. Now, there's two different things that you can feel this confidence about. The first is the position. You are the decision maker. How confident do you feel about having that responsibility? Are you confident that you are the right person in the right position? Do you feel that you have the appropriate amount of authority in this situation? The second is, are you confident in yourself? Are you confident in your person? Now, as you work through the issues of confidence, if you're confident in your position, you feel like you can take the authority and own the decision. Take responsibility for it. If you're confident in who you are, you're willing to be vulnerable and to make yourself vulnerable and to ask the important questions, to gather the information, to make an important decision and to commit to your decision. But if you're feeling insecure in your position, if you're not sure, it will create some unintended consequences. It will create some effects that you may not desire in the decision-making process. If you're feeling threatened in your position, sometimes you may make a decision based on a power move. And, or if you're feeling insecure as a person, it may cause you to continually second guess yourself. All of this plays into effect in committing to the decision. And to commit to a decision. We're going to take some more time talking about the different factors of being decisive and comparing and contrasting decisive and indecisive leaders. Specifically, how you feel as a decision maker. So when I say you're faced with a decision, how do you feel about that? What's your first response? Do you feel confident? Do you feel insecure? What if we're talking about the decision is to buy a car? How do you feel in that scenario? If we're talking about going grocery shopping, do you feel confident? Do you feel insecure? Or changing careers, or making an important decision for your company. All of these things, you need to step back, take a look at yourself. Are you confident that you are the right person for the job? Even if you don't feel that confident, maybe you are assigned that position. You grab hold of that confidence. Do you feel confident in yourself as a decision maker? This is necessary to commit to a decision. We're taking a look inside at ourselves as the decision maker. Let's compare and contrast the decisive and the indecisive individual. And I don't know if right up front you would characterize yourself as either one of those. But I want to say that just because you make a decision quickly does not necessarily mean that you're a decisive or indecisive person. It's not all based on timing. Instantly we would think, well, a decisive person is going to make a decision right away. Well, sometimes you are actually deciding to take more time to gather the information. Now, every individual that takes more time to gather information does not mean they're a decisive person either. They could be indecisive and get stuck in that whole loop of analysis paralysis, getting hung up in the details and never pulling the trigger on a decision, never committing to it because they're just always waiting. That is a form of indecision. So I don't want you to just say because you take a long time in your decisions that you're indecisive, but it's important that you know why you're taking time, not just to procrastinate the decision, but that you are looking for specific information, trying to define what you're trying to accomplish and going through those steps we talked about before. A decisive person understands their priorities, has a good view of what it is they're shooting for. This is what's important, here's what we're going for, and they're ready to commit to that action, commit to that decision that they're making. An indecisive person can kind of get mixed up as to what the priorities are and take a while to figure out what it is they're trying to accomplish. In the same way with goals, an indecisive person may be really unsure of what the objectives or the goals of the decision are, while the decisive person has a very clear vision of where they're headed and what they're trying to accomplish through the decision that's in front of them and the goals for their self or their company. A decisive person owns the decision. They're ready to make the decision and stand by it. In fact, they're willing to make the wrong choice. Even if it isn't what everybody else wants, they're willing to stand by their decision. The indecisive person, many times, for fear of making the wrong decision, never makes a decision at all and doesn't own up to it. Probably the most interesting fact is the decisive person owns their decision and owns their role in such a way that they can commit to being vulnerable, commit to asking the stupid questions. Many times I think we're afraid to speak up or admit an insecurity or admit something that we doubt or we're unsure of in leadership or in a decision that we're making. We're afraid to be vulnerable. But when you're a decisive person and you know you're willing to ask the difficult questions, an indecisive person is more insecure and afraid to admit that they don't know. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to know that you don't know and ask the question. That does not make you indecisive. That actually makes you a stronger leader. being willing to ask the question. And like we talked about earlier in the series, to open up and get answers from the people around us. In the next segment, we're going to look even deeper at some of the internal motivations in our decision making. Why do you do what you do? What really motivates you? As we look at decision making, we need to ask that question of ourselves. What is my motivation? Why do I do what I do? It really comes down to two categories of motivations we have in life. Are we motivated by love? Are we motivated by fear? When you go to work, are you motivated by loving what you do or the people you serve? Are you afraid to not show up because of your boss? Are you afraid of being broke? Do you have a passion for learning that sends you to school? Or are you afraid of not getting a job, so you're going in fear? Let's talk a little bit more about this. John Lennon says, "When we are afraid, we pull back from life. But when we are in love, we are open to all that life has to offer." I want to illustrate it this way. Fear is clutching. It's holding on. Love is open and giving. These motivations can affect us each and every day. Even when you look at parenting, do you try to create an environment to grow strong, healthy children because you love them? Or do you really try to control them? Do you really try to make sure that you appear like a good parent? You're more worried, fearful about what you look like as a parent than you are about the health of your children. Let's look at some examples. Love is, by definition, sacrificial. It's giving. It's laying down your priorities to meet the need of another. It's serving. It's serving others. Fear is selfish. You got to get what you can get. It's protecting yourself, your own interests, your own desires. It's a motivator of clutching, of grabbing. It's micromanaging because you're afraid. Love is sacrificial. It's opening. Love is being willing. When you're motivated by love, you're willing to open yourself up. It's a risk. Now, it's not to say that there isn't potential for hurt. That's part of what vulnerability is. It's putting yourself out there. It's opening yourself up to suggestion. It's asking for help. Being fear is not trusting. Being very guarded and many times putting up a facade to put forward an image that is different than you really are. Love promotes unity. It wants us to work together for a common good. Even when there's diversity and variety, it's pulling things together to work together. It's understanding where somebody is at. Fear is more focused on uniformity. and more specifically, my way. Love is focused on us. Fear is focused on I. Challenge yourself to look at your motivation. Do you find yourself clutching? Do you find yourself making decisions based on your own self-interest? Do you find yourself being selfish, guarded, trying to get your way, what's best for yourself? Or is it for the greater good? Are you living sacrificially? Are you being willing to be vulnerable? Are you focused on the unity of the organization you're leading? Are you thinking about us? Are we? Are you focused on I or me? What is your motivation? Next, we're going to look at what it means to be motivated by being a people pleaser and the cause and effect that has on your decision making. Question of ourselves. What is my motivation? Why do I do what I do? It really comes down to two categories of motivations we have in life. Are we motivated by love? Are we motivated by fear? When you go to work, are you motivated by loving what you do or the people you serve? Are you afraid to not show up because of your boss? Are you afraid of being broke? Do you have a passion for learning that sends you to school? Or are you afraid of not getting a job, so you're going in fear? Let's talk a little bit more about this. John Lennon says, when we are afraid, we pull back from life. But when we are in love, we are open to all that life has to offer. I want to illustrate it this way. Fear is clutching. It's holding on. Love is open and giving. These motivations can affect us each and every day. Even when you look at parenting, do you try to create an environment to grow strong, healthy children because you love them? Or do you really try to control them? Do you really try to make sure that you appear like a good parent? You're more worried, fearful about what you look like as a parent than you are about the health of your children. Let's look at some examples. Love is, by definition, sacrificial. It's giving. It's laying down your priority. In an earlier session, we talked about making a decision on purpose, and one of those steps was the people involved in the decision-making process. When you make a decision, you do need to collaborate with the people around you and consider who is being affected. But let's look at people in terms of your inner motivation. We just spoke of love and fear being internal motivations. Love being more sacrificial and giving, fear being controlling and holding on. Enter the people you deal with. Now, right on the surface, we'd say, well, if we love people, we want to keep them happy. But people-pleasing can be very difficult in decision making. Let me just read a list, and you tell me if this sounds like you. Dr. Jay Early printed an article, and he asked this list, if this sounds like you. I try to be who someone wants me to be. I'm afraid to rock the boat. It's hard for me to know what I want. I avoid speaking my mind. I find it easier to go along with what someone wants or with their opinion. I dream about a strong person taking over my life and making it work. It's hard for me to express my feelings when they're different from someone I'm close to. It's difficult for me to say no. I avoid getting angry. It's hard for me to take initiative. I try to be nice rather than expressing how I really feel. I just want everyone to get along. Do any one of those sound like you, or a majority of them? No, on the surface, they're not necessarily bad things. But when that becomes your internal motivation, is to please people, it'll keep you from being decisive and keep you from making the best or the wisest decisions possible because you're so focused on being a people pleaser. Making decisions based on pleasing everyone will fail, and you've probably heard this before. Trying to please everyone pleases no one. but you also lose your identity because you're always trying to be somebody else. You're trying to fit into what they want you to be rather than doing what you know is right. Individuals need a leader. Even if they don't agree with what the leader is going to do, they need somebody to be in charge. You need to have the confidence to make your decisions. When you're living as a people pleaser, you've completely lost sight of your core values. You lose the integrity of who you are because in every circumstance, you're just thinking, well, I feel like this is the right thing to do, but I'm worried about what people think. We need to include people in our decision making. That's part of being love motivated, for considering others. But it's very important that we don't fear people, that we don't fear the outside, and let that completely erode our goals, our values, the principles and priorities that guide us. While effective decision-making does involve considering the thoughts, opinions, and effect that it has on other people, it's very important we don't let that become a stance of fear and let that control us. On the other opposite end is what we're going to look at next, what it means to make your decisions based on your ego. We talked about fear-based decision-making and how that's such a selfish motivation. Taking that to the extreme degree, we would call that ego-driven decision-making. When you are driven by your ego, success is defined by how you look to other people. It's by your image. If, as you're considering an important decision, if your main question is how will I look? Will I look smart to other people? Will I look successful? Will I look like I know what I'm doing? That's a signal that you're ego-driven. An ego-driven leader or decision maker is kind of happy to see the failure of others. When somebody else fails, it gives them the one-up. Their ego is more important than the result in any situation. An ego-driven decision maker deflects criticism. They're so much concerned with themselves that they have tons of grace for their own mistakes, but none for anyone else's. So when they make a decision and it's criticized, they will quickly deflect that. The ego-driven leader always wants to be right at the expense of any relationship, as long as they appear right, because their ego is that much in control of them. Now, you may think, well, if somebody says, oh, I'm not that good, it's possible that they are still an ego-driven leader. An ego-driven leader can be displaying false humility. And maybe if we're going to bring this back home and talk about ourselves, maybe you catch yourself in that situation. That it's hard for you to accept praise, you're quick to brush it off, but it's really a false humility. An ego-driven leader thrives on praise ultimately, but sometimes it will display a false humility just so it appears to others that they're humble. Again, going back that the success is all based on their image. If you're motivated by love, that means you sacrifice your ego in your decision making. You take that out of the equation. You become more humble, more vulnerable, more open to criticism, more open to the opinions of others. So ultimately, the ego-driven leader is motivated by fear. Next, we're going to look at how results can be your motivation in decision making.
Computer updated.
The final motivator we're going to look at in decision making is being results driven. The results driven decision maker only cares about the bottom line at the expense of everything else. Success only comes down to the profit for the businessman. It's all about making the most money. Regardless of what's right or what's wrong, how does it help our profit? For the student, or the results driven, is only concerned with the grade. I don't care about anything else as long as the grade is as much as I can get. The coach is concerned about the win. That becomes the only thing, the results-driven decision maker. The danger in that is it can lead to taking shortcuts. You're so consumed and value the bottom line more than anything else to the degree that cheating takes place. Taking shortcuts, lack of integrity. Another danger is that you find yourself in the position that you're using people to get what you want. You'll step over people. You'll lose relationships. If you're a leader of a business, you may experience a high turnover in employees because you're only concerned about the bottom line, not in the needs of others. This can also create a closed-minded situation because you're so entrenched in getting to that bottom line that it closes the door to creativity. You're not open to new things, new input, new ideas, or looking at things in a new and creative way of looking at things. You can get yourself into a position of having an unsustainable pace. When you're so results-driven, you can just keep driving and keep driving. For the story of the golden goose, you need to feed the golden goose, not cut it open to try to get the results faster. All of this, you have to be careful that it's still filtered and still fueled under the love-motivated leader. Yes, you want your bottom line to be successful. If you're going to lead a business, you need a successful bottom line. You can still do that based in love. The fear-based leader that's focused on the bottom line is going to do it at the expense of everything else. It's really important, all things, that you look at your internal motivations as a leader in all the areas we've talked about. In the next session, we're going to look at wisdom and how that plays a role in decision making. You have a decision to make. We've gone through this entire series talking about what a decision is, how it's an action based on the choices available to you. We've looked at the steps of making a decision on purpose, not just backing yourself into a corner and doing what's left, but knowing your goals, your values, the principles that drive you. And we've talked about some of our internal motivations about love and fear and other things that wrap up into the decision-making process. But you're presented with a frustration, a question, a dilemma. And I want to ask you, what question do you ask when that comes up? Andy Stanley has written a book called The Best Question Ever. And that's kind of where I want to go with this next group of segments here. A lot of times, we're presented with a question, and we say, what is the thing to do? Fill in that blank. What word do you think it is? Now, we might come up with, what is the best thing to do? I think in any dilemma we face, that's probably the first word we're looking for. I want to make the best decision. No, what do we use as a result to determine if something is the best decision? Is it the profit? Or is there some other measure of decision evaluation that we use to figure out what the best thing to do? Or maybe we're wondering, what is the moral or right thing to do? What is the right thing to do? But then you ask the question, right by whom? What is the right thing to do? Or maybe it's, what is the popular thing to do? We talked about being a people pleaser. What would keep everyone the happiest? Is that the question we should be asking in decision making? Or, if you're more financially minded, what is the cheapest thing to do? You're going to buy a car. What's the cheapest thing to do? Well, you can get some pretty cheap cars. Does that make it the right decision? Does that make it the cheapest decision? Or maybe you're fueled more by experiences, and so you ask yourself, what is the most fun thing to do? Live for the moment, carpe diem, seize the day. But I think we should look at a different question. What is the wise thing to do? Wisdom is an incredible thing. Wisdom is making a decision based on good judgment, experience, and knowledge, and all of the knowledge that is available to you. The interesting thing is that in any given circumstance, the wise decision might not be the same decision you make as it is for someone else. In the next videos, we're going to look through 3 different categories of wisdom. And I want you to ask yourself, in light of my past experiences, in light of my present circumstances, and in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? We're going to look at 3 different categories. The first is, in light of my past experience, what is the wise thing to do? Winston Churchill said, "Those who don't learn from history are destined to repeat it." You have a lot of experiences in your life. When you're faced with the decision, you need to draw from the experiences you've had. Sometimes those experiences can be somewhat painful. But it's important, especially at decision-making time, to just take a step back and say, okay, the last time I came up with this situation, or last time I was confronted with this issue, what was the result? Or, the last time I had to make this decision, I did this. How successful did that turn out? Many times we can learn more from the failures of the past than we can from our successful decisions, just because we can look back and see what went wrong. I remember the first time I had lobster. I didn't know I was allergic to it, but I had an instant reaction. The second time lobster was presented to me, I learned from that. So it was not wise at the moment for me to try lobster again. Sometimes you can learn from the mistakes that others have made. Based on the past experiences they had, what is the wise thing to do? And seeking advice there. It's important that you don't just go through life repeating mistake after mistake after mistake. Consider your past experiences. You've failed before. You've struggled before. If you're having financial difficulties, know your tendencies, know how impulsive you are, and make your decisions accordingly. And ask yourself this question: in light of my past experience, what is the wise thing to do?
Computer updated.
The wise thing for me to do. We've already looked at based on my past experiences, but now we're going to look at, in light of my present circumstances, what is the wise thing for me to do? Just consider purchasing a vehicle. Now, maybe even in the past you purchased a brand new vehicle, but your financial situation right now might be such that, in light of my present circumstances, that's not the wise thing for me to do. Or maybe you're in a situation where you're on a new eating plan because of diet and health decisions that you've made, and you need to support those decisions. In light of my present circumstances and the fact that I'm very hungry, I should not go into my favorite restaurant right now because I would not eat very healthy. I should not go shopping when I'm hungry based on my present circumstances. This question can many times have to do with the timing of the decision you make. Maybe it would be the best thing to do, or the right thing to do, or even ultimately the most fun thing to do. But based on your present circumstances, it would not be the wise thing to do. it doesn't necessarily mean it's a wrong decision based on what you're facing. Maybe you're determining what college to go to get a degree from, and you want to go to a very specialized institution. Well, it may make sense to start off at a more affordable, a cheaper school, because even though the best school is where you want to end up, based on your present circumstances, maybe that's not an affordable option. You can take the time to do a real evaluation, not only of your past experiences, but your present circumstances in trying to decide what is the wisest thing for you to do, given the present circumstances. Earlier in this series, we talked about priorities. When you're asking yourself the question, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? You're actually eliminating regret. You're taking away the potential to make a quick decision based on an emotional response or a quick response and end up losing out on some future hopes and dreams that you might lay out. So there's two elements that are laid out here. One is to define, where are you going? Do you know what you're shooting for in the long run? This is like pre-fighting the battle. Before you end up in the grocery store looking at the appetizing food and the candy counter, you've already determined that no, I have a specific battle that I'm going to win. If I'm going to lose weight, I have to make that decision. So before I even get into that situation, I know that in light of my future hopes and dreams of losing all this weight, there's no way I can purchase that. You've already won that battle. If you live for the moment, you will lose battle and experience regret. Sure, that one candy bar might not make a difference, but over time, the habit of sacrificing your future hopes and dreams for living for the moment is going to catch up to you. There's no way to win. I want to encourage you, when asking yourself the questions, when you're faced with a decision, don't ask what's the best thing to do. Don't fall into the people-pleasing situation and just look for the popular thing to do. Not even the most fun, or the cheapest thing to do. But always ask yourself, in light of my past experience, my present circumstance, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? I want to thank you for joining us on this series on decision making. Throughout this series, we've explored what a decision really is. It's about taking an action based on the choices and options that are available to you. We talked about making a decision on purpose, going through the steps of what it takes to make a confident decision. We've stepped away from the external points of decision making and looked at our internal motivations. We've talked about whether or not you yourself is a decisive individual or indecisive. And are you motivated more by love or more by fear? And how can you stay away from the perils of being ego-driven or results-driven, or being spun in circles by being a people-pleaser? Even more importantly, we looked into the issue of wisdom and how you can evaluate your history, the things you're going through now and where you're going to make the wisest choice in every circumstance. I hope that through this series you've gained some
Computer updated. Computer updated.
Initiating scan. Acquired. Personnel located. Prompt air transmission disrupted. Now exiting. Communication facility. Locate strong research hangar. Securing threat. Strong experimental fire. End transmission.